Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Esoteric Literacy. Today we'll be discussing a system that I sort of developed, just a system of thought. It's my own way of looking at the world, it's kind of just my own opinion. And I've just developed this way of looking at the world over the last, 15 years or whatever. And I call it the 4 pillars of civilization. Now, these 4 pillars are like the 4 legs of a table. A table cannot stand unless it has 4 legs. So these are the 4 absolutely crucial aspects of our civilization. And they are honestly the crucial aspects of our intellect as well, and how we engage with the world. And without these, civilization essentially collapses. When one or more of these goes wrong, within either a human individual or within civilization at large, then that is when problems arise. So these 4 pillars are science, religion, philosophy, and art. And these are the crucial aspects of a functioning personality and a functioning civilization. I know a lot of you are probably like banging on your keyboards and screaming at your laptop or whatever, talking about how evil religion is and how it should be destroyed and how there's no way that religion could be a crucial aspect of civilization. So instead of, arguing that point, I'm going to tell you that your definition of religion is incorrect. There's a difference between religion and institutionalized religion. Religion is not the same as organized religion. Religion comes from a Latin word, also sort of Greek root in there. It's re-ligios. Ligios is where we get the word ligament, and re means source or origin. So religion means to unite, like a ligament unites 2 things together, to unite to the source. Now, if you don't like the word religion, you can use the word spirituality, if the word religion leaves a bad taste in your mouth, or you can use the word yoga. Yoga is a Sanskrit word that means divine union. It's literally the exact same word as religion. So religion, I'm not talking about institutionalized, organized religious groups or any orthodoxy or anything like that. Religion means to bind or to unite with the source. And if you don't believe that that is an absolutely crucial aspect of civilization, I would argue that your thinking is obscured. There is an origin of reality. Everyone can agree on that. We exist, therefore there is an origin of this existence. To unite to that origin is important. To understand what the origin of reality is obviously incredibly important. Therefore, religion, which is to unite with that source, is absolutely crucial for civilization and for an individual personality to be healthy and to flourish, without which you get psychoses and decadence. Now, the definition of the term science is not just materialistic science as we have come to know it over the last century and a half, or 4 centuries rather, but more particularly in the last century and a half, it's become extraordinarily materialistic. Science is an unbiased and systematic search for external truth. So if you can think of religion or spirituality, yoga, whatever, as more of an internal thing, where you sort of turn your senses and your consciousness in on itself, science is when your consciousness is pointed outward and you seek knowledge that way. Science is not science unless it is unbiased. If you know anything about quantum physics and modern science, it's incredibly biased and has become its own religion, which we'll cover. We'll cover how that has come to be later in this lecture. Philosophy would be the synthesis between the external and internal forms of knowledge. So if religion is internal, science is external, philosophy is the bridge between internal and external. And it's like a non-dual approach. There's like the subject-object approach. Philosophy is moving beyond subject and object. Philosophy is moving beyond the duality of internal and external, of subject and object, and having a holistic view of reality. So it's sort of like bringing science and religion together. That is philosophy. A lot of people don't really know what philosophy is. I mean, if you go to college and study philosophy, you're going to study a lot of like bull crap. That's just like, you're just going to study Immanuel Kant and Schopenhauer and Descartes, and they're just going to tell you that philosophy is just the way stupid old men dream about things, or just like people's opinions about what reality is. And people have a very, very incorrect idea of what philosophy is. Philosophy comes from the Greek words philo and sophia, to love wisdom, or Sophia being the goddess of wisdom, or just the word wisdom itself. So to love wisdom. So wisdom is not just your imaginings. It's not just like Descartes thinking about some stupid crap and having an opinion on it. Wisdom is truth. So in order for something to be philosophical, it must be true. If it's just some sort of imaginings, like if you read like Daniel Dennett's Freedom Evolves or Consciousness Explained, like it's a lot of horse crap, like, don't get me wrong, Daniel Dennett is a deep and penetrating thinker, but I think he's incredibly mistaken. His approach to philosophy is ridiculous, and it's just his opinions. It's just like he's dreaming about things and writing that this is what I think the brain is, this is what I think consciousness is. And if it's your opinion, then it's probably not true. It could be, but it might not be. In order for something to be philosophical, it has to be true. So that leaves an extremely narrow window for what philosophy can be, because it has to be true. So most of what people call philosophy really isn't philosophy. It's an extremely narrow and rare thing for someone to be a philosopher, or for someone to be able to write a book on philosophy, or to be able to explain philosophy, because it is within the definition of the term philosophy that what is being spoken about or written about must be true. So we can imagine how absolutely difficult it is to write something that is true. And how do you even know what something is true or not? And that's where science comes in to verify what is true or not. Things like that, and religion on the internal side to verify what is true or not. So it's an incredibly difficult balance to achieve a real philosophy. And it's not something easy. It's not something you just go to college for, read a couple of books by, Descartes, and then think you know what philosophy is. You get a degree in philosophy and you're suddenly a philosopher because you can sit at your coffee table and imagine things about how the brain works. Like, that's not philosophy. I'm sorry, it's just not. And the fourth leg of the table, the fourth pillar, would be art, of course. Now, art would be the application of all of these things, It's the application of internal and external knowledge. And, that's pretty simple. Without the application of science, religion, and philosophy, I mean, you don't really have a civilization. I mean, you could just be hunter-gatherers forever, and you don't really apply that. But I mean, on one part, like, hunter-gatherers societies do apply at least religion with shamanism. They don't really apply science and they don't really apply philosophy, but they do apply religion, so they're at least standing on one leg. But without art, you really don't have a civilization. You have a quite stagnant, boring, almost animalistic way of being without art. Art is like what builds an external personality of an individual, and it's what builds, an actual external civilization. There are intersections between these four pillars, the combinations of all of them. Like, so for instance, the intersection of science and religion could be what Rudolf Steiner calls spiritual science, or the act of seeking. So when the scientific impulse and the religious impulse meet, you have someone obviously who is seeking knowledge, seeking internal and external knowledge. You have the seeker, you have the scientist, you have the shaman, you have the priest, you have the thinker, the contemplator, the monk, the experimenter, the laboratory hermit. That's the intersection of science and religion is seeking. The intersection between religion and philosophy would be mysticism. So you have, a heavy dose of internal seeking with religion, and then the philosophy wants you to bring that to the external. So you start, what do mystics do? They see signs. They see a bird flying a certain way. That's an external thing, but it makes them think of internal meanings. Like, what does it spiritually mean that this bird flew in such a way in front of me at this particular moment? You start thinking about things like synchronicities, meaningful coincidences. So the coincidences happen in the external material world, but they mean something deeply to you. And you might have some people that will like take exotic drugs like shrooms and DMT based substances and whatnot, and that will be mostly internal, but the stimulus will be external. So, and you have like a sort of mystical experience. Not that I recommend that, because personally I believe hallucinogenic drugs are a sideways movement, not an upward movement of consciousness. That's my opinion from my experience in my life. So yeah, I'm not saying like drugs are actually mystical. I'm just saying it's mostly internal, but with a dose of the external. So that's the intersection of religion and philosophy. Then you have the intersection of art and philosophy, which essentially that's like epic poetry. Like the Ramayana, the Hindu texts, the Bible, for instance. That's the Old Testament is mostly historical allusions and things like that, and metaphor. But the New Testament is like sort of in the shape of an epic poem, because it's very Mithraic, Odinic. It has those qualities that are in a lot of the old religions and stories. The same, the dying god who is resurrected. That's the sort of traditional epic poem, and it's mostly philosophical. It's less historical than it is philosophical. And to bring that philosophy into a nice coherent story that you can pass on around a campfire, that's obviously artistic. It's very useful to be able to take a philosophy and turn it into like this beautiful myth that's very, very helpful for people, for the development of a person's mind and soul, and for the development of a civilization. That's the artistic application of philosophy. So you get like epic poetry is essentially the intersection there. And then an intersection between science and art is obviously technology. You learn about some natural principles and how certain things work, and then you can apply those natural principles to make things like, for instance, this digital camera that I'm recording this on. You learn a little bit about light, you learn a little bit about how materials can collect light, you learn a little bit about, quartz crystals and how they store information and memory of events, and you put all that stuff together and you get a camera. So the, intersection of art and science, that one's pretty clear, and we use that one a lot. In our modern civilization, we've been obsessed with that since about, the 14th, 15th century. We've been absolutely obsessed with this idea of developing newer and newer technologies, of taking what we learned through science and applying it artistically, and developing all sorts of fun and interesting toys that our civilization is absolutely filled with. Then that brings us, to the intersection of science and philosophy. So now we have a sort of, kind of like how religion and philosophy, religion being mostly internal, and then philosophy trying to bring it out to the external. Now we have science, the intersection of science and philosophy, which science is mostly external, and then philosophy will try to, bring it in to the internal a little bit. So that's where you get epistemology. That, epistemology is basically like, the study of how we know what we know. Like, how do you know what knowledge is? How do you know when you know something? You know what I mean? Like, epistemology is an extremely nebulous and difficult to grasp subject, which is why there aren't many books on it, and the books that do exist are really crappy. There aren't really any good epistemologists in this world, because it's such a difficult discipline. Like, how can you prove what knowledge is? How do you know what the truth is when you experience it? How do we know what we know? Epistemology, what is knowledge, and what is human consciousness, and what is the interaction between our subjective consciousness and real knowledge, real truthful knowledge? So that's the intersection of science and philosophy, epistemology. And the last combination would be between religion and art. And this is where you get hygiene. I don't mean keeping yourself clean, like taking a shower and clipping your fingernails. The word hygiene is an ancient Greek word, or it's just a Greek word, it's not necessarily ancient, and it means everything in its right proportion. It basically means harmony, it means proportionality. It doesn't just mean cleanliness. That's like a modern corruption, perversion, because people don't actually know much about where words come from, and they start to get used incorrectly over the centuries. We don't use the word hygiene properly anymore. It's been probably about 1,500 years since the last person used the word hygiene correctly. Hygiene means everything in its correct proportion, everything in its right place, harmonious, when like you see like a beautiful cathedral or something, and its proportions are like to the phi ratio, the golden ratio, like the door is perfectly shaped and sized to be in beautiful golden proportions to the towers, and you just like go into the cathedral and it just feels right. It just feels like, yeah, these architects knew what they were doing. These proportions have a very pleasing effect on my mind. And, you know, the colors through the stained glass are just right. Like, you know, the sound of the music coming off the walls, like in the harmonies of the notes that are being played by the instruments that are tuned just perfectly. You know, all these things, this is all hygiene. So when religion and art intersect, this is where you get hygiene. This is where you get like just having things in the right proportion, building buildings that look correct and good, that have, you know, so your cities don't look like jumbled up, chaotic, brutalistic nonsense, but when you like walk into a city that everything is built in this beautifully aesthetic way that has actually a good effect on the mind, as opposed to looking at ugly buildings that have a negative effect on the mind, you know, or listening to music that is cacophonous and disharmonious as opposed to listening to music that is very harmonious. For instance, the body is made up of like 70 to 80% water. Sound waves have an effect on water. You can subject petri dishes of water to different vibrations and freeze the ice crystals and look at those ice crystals under a microscope, and you will see certain frequencies leave beautiful symmetrical snowflakes and symmetrical circles and just nice harmonious looking water crystals, and then other frequencies and notes and combinations of frequencies will leave cacophonous, asymmetrical, nonsense ice crystals. So having your body being made up of mostly water, you have to think, well, what frequencies and sounds do I want to subject myself to? Like, what kind of music do I want to listen to? Do I want to listen to music that's going to disrupt and bring in these cacophonous water crystals into my body, or do I want to listen to music that's going to make nice symmetrical shapes and resonant shapes, water crystals in my body? So there is like objectively good music and objectively bad music. It's, you know, people think art is like a subjective thing, but it honestly, it isn't. I mean, if you look at a painting from, say, like the 17th or 18th century, where these people were painting like photorealistic people, you know, like these scenes of people in the flowing robes, and it looks like real silk, and the person, it looks like it's a photograph, you know? And then you look at like a Jackson Pollock painting. Now, subjectively, you could prefer the Jackson Pollock painting. You could like it better. You could like that style, just, you know, jizzing all over a canvas. You could think that's very cool looking. But you cannot say that the Jackson Pollock painting is better than one of these 18th century photorealistic paintings. Obviously, the 18th century photorealistic painting is objectively better. It took a great deal more skill, a great deal more time. These are objective qualities, not subjective ones. You could prefer the Jackson Pollock one. You could like it more, and you could rather have that hanging in your living room. That's totally fine. Your preference for it is subjective. But the art itself is not subjective. One is objectively better than the other. And that goes with music. It goes with everything. It goes with the proportionality of buildings. You know, would you rather live in like a brutalist building? Like, you know, those old Soviet compounds that like make you feel like you're in a Beetlejuice movie or something? Or would you rather live in like a Gothic cathedral? Like, one of those has been shown through history to make people feel very uncomfortable and very uneasy, which is the brutalist architecture. And the other, the Gothic cathedrals, make people feel very relaxed, very uplifted, their minds are sharper. Like, these are not subjective effects, these are objective effects that have been recorded throughout history, that people feel better and are sharper mind and a more pleasant mood in Gothic style proportionality, and they are uneasy and a little nervous feeling, and their physiologies work worse in brutalistic Soviet-style architecture. So, you know, true art is not subjective. Your preference for it is, but the qualities of it are absolutely objective. And when you properly bring religion into art, that's when you get the good art. When spirituality and art are properly intersected, that is when you have objectively good art that has a good effect on your body, mind, and soul. So obviously these four pillars are pretty fragile. If you've been following along, you've probably been having your own thoughts as to all the problems that we have with these 4 pillars. They have to be kept in balance, and they each have to be pure and truthful on their own, and they have to intersect correctly. So like, I know I say there are 4 pillars, but really all 4 of these things are really one whole, very interconnected whole. You really can't separate science from religion, from art, from philosophy. They're very much intertwined. It's more like, you know, a salad or like a cake batter, like the eggs and the flour and the milk and whatnot. They get mixed all together and become one thing. You know, you don't have separate eggs and flour and milk and stuff when you bake a cake. You put it all together and it's quite homogenized. So, you know, I'm kind of breaking up these 4 things in a Cartesian way, kind of isolating them, but they're really not isolated. So you got to think of these 4 pillars as very much together, and that's why I wanted to point out the intersections amongst all 4 of them and show how they really bleed together. Breaking things apart into their individual categories can help us think about things for a time, like the alchemical process of separation and then coagulation. You have to sort of divide things to sort of understand them, but then you got to make sure you bring them back together at the end. Our civilization kind of just did the separate with René Descartes and modern science, and we just kept separating and separating and separating, and that's our modern world. We have not done the coagulation yet. So I'm hoping that, you know, lectures like this will help with the bringing back together of all the things that we've separated. Continuing with this separation and purification of these things, these 4 pillars have to be pure on their own. You have to have like a truthful, pure science, truthful, pure spirituality or religion, truthful, pure philosophy, truthful, pure art, and so that they can interact with each other properly. Because you'll notice, if you do this thought experiment, this sort of contemplation meditation, which I've done for many years now, is to take one of the 4 pillars and just remove it. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Well, not pretend it doesn't exist, but, you know, get rid of it from your heart and mind and from civilization, and sit there and think about it. Like, what would our civilization be without science at all? It was just gone. It was something that we never developed, or perhaps some bad thing happened and it disappeared. You know, like, what would life and civilization be, you know, your individual life and civilization as a whole, think about both those things, be without spirituality? What would it be without philosophy? What would it be without art? So remove these things one at a time and just see what happens. You just have to really just sit back and meditate and think about, like, what would my life be like without religion, spirituality, without science? How would I feel? What would happen in civilization without these things? What would happen to the institutions of our government? What would happen to the way we develop our economies? Like, just really think about it, and you'll realize rather quickly that you can't get rid of any of these 4 things. It will create a vacuum, and you will feel this vacuum very intensely within your own heart and mind. You will be like, there is something missing, and you will have this terrible urge to fill that vacuum with something. So if you get rid of religion, you need to replace it. If you get rid of science, you need to replace it. You feel this vacuum just trying to suck anything in there. And you'll find that the vacuum is so powerful that most people will easily just suck in the first logical alternative that comes along. And it could be the most corrupt and perverted version of the true pillar. And just because it fits that vacuum nicely, they accept it as true, and it's good enough, because we cannot tolerate that sense of a vacuum, that psychic sort of vacuum that these things create. And that is what has been happening in our civilization for the past few centuries, well, past few thousand years, to be perfectly frank, is that certain groups will come along, you know, maybe they're tyrants, maybe they're revolutionaries, maybe they're super conservative traditionalists, maybe they're some sort of group of people, some secret society, maybe they're Masons or Illuminati or whatever, and they kind of forcefully remove one of these 4 things, or perhaps one of these 4 things just gets slowly corrupted over time by muddled thinking. And then that thing gets replaced with a bad version of what it should be. It should be pure and true, like I said, but now it isn't. So for instance, like, we'll start with religion since that's the easiest one. You know, you look at the pure definition of religion, uniting with the source of reality. Super simple, right? And people have made it complex. People have decided to make different sects of, you know, different churches, different temples, different religions, different cultures have different views, and they have their own dogmatic beliefs about, you know, how the universe works and where it came from. And instead of, you know, examining these things with a little more honesty and openness toward each other, they kind of just believe what they were taught, and they want to believe that their way is the correct way. And now what should have been pure of just people seeking the source of reality has become dogmatic. Now people just listen to what their priests or shamans tell them and just believe it. And then these institutions built up around it, and now these institutions behave more like governments than they behave like religious guidance. You know, like, nobody gets spiritual guidance from the Catholic Church. I mean, give me a break. They get placations and guilt trips on how to behave well under their form of Catholic government. And they learn how to be a good Catholic citizen. And that is not spiritual guidance, that is government. That is law and legislation. They are behaving the way Washington, D.C. behaves, you know? They behave the way Beijing behaves. You know, there are a lot of Orthodox religions out there. It's just the Catholic Church is the most prominent one. They're the easiest target for me to take pot shots at. But this goes for pretty much any orthodoxy that's out there. They behave like governments and not really like spiritual guides. And that's a corruption. You know, that's because we have lost sight of real spirituality because of certain groups of people who have said you're not allowed to unite yourself to the source. You need to go through me. I'm a priest. I will be you can get to God vicariously through me. That's what the word vicar means. It's that you can't have a direct relationship with God or with Tao or with Buddha or with the source of reality. You have to have that relationship vicariously through a priest. And now, of course, that priest has a ton of power over the community because he is the gatekeeper of the source of reality now. And he just gained a bunch of political power. He can gain wealth. He can gain all sorts of things because of that. And obviously that's going to corrupt the priest. There's no such thing as an institution like that can remain uncorrupted. It's basically impossible. I mean, I'm hopeful that it could happen in the future maybe, but as it stands, someone who claims power like that and says you're not allowed to have a relationship with reality, only I am, and you have to do it through me, that is on its face, on its foundation, corrupt. That corruption of the pillar of religion has led to the corruption of the pillar of science. So now, because a lot of people are fine with that idea, they're like, okay, yeah, screw organized religion. You know, it's easy for people since like the 18th century and on to be like, yeah, screw the church, screw the temple, it's all nonsense. Like, I'm not going to waste my time with that crap. And then you had like the Age of Reason or the Age of Enlightenment or the Age of Science, the, you know, post-Renaissance era of thought. And you have all these people that are like, yeah, obviously, like, screw organized religion. We don't need religion at all. You have philosophers like Voltaire and whatnot. And it's become quite easy for science now to fill the religious gap in you know, to fill that vacuum. So like these people who say, okay, yeah, screw religion. We don't need this dogmatic crap with the priestcraft and they're just behaving like a corrupt government. So just wipe that from my psyche. I don't need that. But like I said, when you remove something, you've now created a vacuum that has to be filled. It's like a law of the psyche that you must have these four pillars. Otherwise you will feel this sucking vacuum inside of your heart. So these people have turned against the church and the temples, and rightfully so, in my opinion. They feel that vacuum and they have to fill it with something. Unfortunately, they filled it with what a lot of people call scientism, which is not science. They think they filled it with science. They think, oh, my table can stand on 3 legs. You know, it will be like a bar stool with 3 legs. I don't need religion. But Little do they know, because they don't really meditate or have much self-awareness, is that they still do have those 4 pillars, and they've taken science over here and kind of just broke off like a version of science and put it in where religion should be, and that became scientism, not science. This is like what I call the religion of materialism. If you look at my video about transhumanism, I describe it in a bit of detail. But they have taken science, which is supposed to be non-dogmatic, and turned it dogmatic. You see, because they need that dogma. They need to fill that religious vacuum. And they don't know how to seek internally, so they have taken external theories of science and turned those into internal dogmas that can give their psyche a foundation, the way spirituality is supposed to. So the corruption of religion has led to the corruption of science. Now people have this new religion of materialism. Obviously Karl Marx really ran with that. Darwinism really ran with that, and quantum physics is the logical conclusion of that, where everything is matter, and they only care about smaller and smaller particles, and everything has to be a particle. And they have these large hadron colliders trying to find smaller and smaller particles, looking for like this foundation of reality that they think is just going to be the smallest particle. And this is obviously fallacious and absurd. It's delusional. I mean, the hadron colliders are literally circular in shape. They're literally running in circles now because of this religion that can't lead anywhere, this scientism. It doesn't make progress anymore because they ignore spiritual reality, they ignore internal conscious reality, and they're only focused on the external. And they have this religion of the external. And the external can only go so far. You will forever find smaller particles. You will crash all these particles together, you'll find smaller ones, you'll crash those particles together and find smaller ones. They are literally running in circles now, making no more progress. It's impossible to make progress. They're a dog chasing its own tail. That is scientism. It's not scientific. To believe that past theories from the 19th and 20th centuries are somehow laws and no longer need to be tested or proven wrong, that's now called dogma. That is not science. To think that some 20th century, 18th, 19th, 20th century scientists have come up with facts and laws, that's dogma. That's like when the prophets of God decreed their laws and everyone just believed them because God said so. Well, now we're doing it because, Einstein said so, because Newton said so. And we don't test those theories anymore. We just keep building on top of these theories. And this creates a house of cards, much like religious institutions are a house of cards, and they started blowing over in the 17th century when scientists started saying like these religious institutions are out of their minds, rightfully so, and the house of cards of religion started to blow over, of organized religion started to blow over. Now we have that with science, or because science is now scientism, and people don't actually follow the scientific method anymore. You go to college and learn that these theories are true, then that you must build upon these theories. And if you try and examine new theories, like if you try and get a grant to study the ether, you get laughed out of college. There's no such thing as ether. We disproved it in the 1890s. There's no such thing as ether, you retard. If you study UFOs, there's no such thing as UFOs. You won't get any grant money for that. You try to study paranormal phenomena, psychic phenomena, all you do is get followed by the CIA, and your college laughs you out of your university, and the grant institutions refuse to give you any money. They get rid of your tenure if you're a professor. Like, they burn witches at the stake still. These are scientists who get angry when people are heretical toward their dogma. And they will destroy your reputation, they will make sure you cannot do your research, they will not peer review your papers, they'll throw them in the wastebasket, they will not publish your books, these publishers will just refuse to publish your findings, scientific journals will refuse to publish your findings, grant institutions won't give you money. We are still burning witches, only this time it's in the name of materialistic science, or scientism, the religion of materialism. And the pillar of science has been corrupted because of that. The pillar of science is largely ignored. The only place where you find true science these days is in etheric and scalar physics, UFO studies, like secret military laboratories and secret rich corporations that do their research in secret because they don't want public scrutiny telling them that they're a bunch of idiots studying these things. So you have like billionaire scientists working on their own money and then they're not publishing their findings because they don't want to be publicly ridiculed. And those are the only places where science is occurring. And because of that, we are learning outdated, outmoded, incorrect information in our schools. That's a serious, serious problem. These two things, the corruption of religion and the corruption of science, have led to the corruption of the philosophical pillar. Like I said, most people don't even know what philosophy means. When they hear like someone majoring in philosophy at college, they laugh at them. It's like a big joke, you know? Well, you can't make money being a philosopher. You can't become a politician being a philosopher. You can't become famous being a philosopher. And these are the things people care about: money, fame, and political influence. And you can't achieve these three things being a philosopher. Well, obviously you can in the right circles. But philosophy is basically a big old joke in the modern world. And it's because nobody knows what it actually is. People think it's just like old men being dreamy, wondering about how the universe works, and they're just kind of coming up with weird, fantastical opinions. That's not philosophy, like I described before, unfortunately. True philosophy is truth. It's based on scientific and spiritual truth, and it's just the bridging of the two, of science and spirituality, of inner and outer. And the corruption of philosophy has led to the corruption of the artistic pillar. You have this postmodern idea of moral relativism. And moral relativism was caused by the corruption of the artistic pillar. Well, it was one of the causes of the onset of moral relativism. People think art is a subjective thing. Now, like I said, your preferences for what art you like, sure, that's absolutely subjective. I'm not going to fault anyone who prefers this kind of artwork over this kind. But as I described, there is a science of aesthetics, because aesthetics affect our mind and body in both positive and negative ways. And the aesthetics that affect us in negative ways are bad for civilization. They cause aberrations of mind and body, illness, and so on. You subject yourself to bad sounds, to bad imagery, to bad architecture, and you get negative health defects and negative mental defects. They lead to neuroses and psychoses and physiological diseases and things like that. And then there's architecture and music and whatnot and visuals that have a beneficial and healing effect and a vivifying effect and a vitalization of the mind and body. So aesthetics is a true and objective science, but that's not seen because people think it's nonsense. They think, oh, it's just placebo. Like, that's not scientific. It again goes back to the corruption of the scientific pillar, that people think like there's no such thing as music that's good for you or healing sounds. There's no such thing as a building that's good for you that can heal your body just by being in a Gothic cathedral. It's like, but yeah, it is true. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of years of evidence to prove that these things are true. And there are sciences, modern sciences, that prove that these things are true. But for some reason, people think it's unscientific to look into this stuff. Because of the corruption of the scientific pillar. It's perfectly scientific, yet most people think it's unscientific. And you have postmodern art, you know, the best example is Jackson Pollock. It's just crap. It's just utter crap. He spent no time at all on it. And he can sell these paintings for millions of dollars, and then the photorealistic paintings get sold for like a couple tens of thousands of dollars. And it's like, people prefer this postmodern crap. It's because they prefer moral relativism. It's not that they actually prefer Jackson Pollock's paintings, it's that they prefer the freedom it gives them to be assholes. They can say, I prefer Jackson Pollock's painting over this photorealistic 18th century painting, because that makes them kind of feel like, you know, they're rebellious. They're rebelling against what is good. They're rebelling against what is truly established. They're rebelling against this excellence. This painter who made these photorealistic paintings, this person is absolutely excellent. And they get kind of jealous or angry that they can't achieve something like that. So they prefer something that they could achieve. You know, anybody can take some ketchup and mustard squirt bottles and squirt a blank canvas and call themselves an artist now. So it's like technically empowering to prefer a Jackson Pollock painting. Because you look at Jackson Pollock, you see he makes millions of dollars, you see he's in like highfalutin social circles, and you see his paintings and you think, well, I could do that too. So it's like people think it's empowering to be into crappy, mediocre artwork. You see that with pop music too. Pop music is garbage. I could write 100 pop songs in a single day. They're so easy to write. They're so mindless, and the composition is so basic and so simple. And I could easily just sell my soul to the devils of the music industry and become like wealthy and famous musician. That is easy to do that shit. And like, that's why people love pop music. They listen to this crap and they think, well, like, I could do that too. So it's technically empowering, but it's not. It's empowering you to lower your standards. It's empowering you to seek money through mediocrity, to seek fame through mediocrity. And that's what happens when the artistic pillar gets corrupted. You have mediocrity above all else. So we can see how important it is to keep these 4 pillars in balance, and the opportunists that come out of the woodwork trying to remove one of these 4 pillars because they know that these 4 pillars have to exist. So if they can remove one and replace it with their own institution, then they will gain a great deal of power. The main thing that the communists did in Russia in the 20th century was, and China, was to eliminate religion and then replace religion with the government. Like you put up pictures of Mao instead of pictures of Jesus Christ, like it's law in China. People used to believe like God provides in the medieval era and earlier, in the Renaissance era and earlier, people would believe God provides. And now, starting the 20th century, communists will believe government provides, and capitalist Westerners will believe money provides. So, of course, like the bankers have replaced God in the Western world, and the governments have replaced God in the Eastern world. And they gained a great deal of power because of that. So, Westerners like have a religion of money and consumerism. They don't believe that spirituality provides for them anymore. They believe that money provides for them. Instead of going to an altar of a religious deity, they go to the altar of the cash register to get what they want. It's been replaced. With philosophy, you get like preference politics. When you try to bridge inner and outer, well, now you just have all these crazy, confused identity politics going on. That's what happens when you don't properly bridge inner and outer. People have like this inner feeling of who they think they are, and it conflicts with the outer world of what actually is. And you just get the worst brand of identity politics that I don't need to go into. There's plenty of lecturers out there who will give you great insight as to what identity politics is and how just god-awful evil it all is, how confused and wretched and stupid identity politics is. So like philosophy just gets replaced with identity politics because nobody knows how to bridge the inner and the outer. So they get confused about what is inner and what is outer. They don't know how to balance their male and female spirit. So they think they have to like cut off their penis. It's just all that sort of crap, this just delusional, schizophrenic nightmare neuroses going around in this world about identity right now. It's caused by the corruption of the philosophical pillar. Opportunists love it when one of these pillars gets destroyed or corrupted because they swoop in right away and they know that they can replace one of these pillars with their own agenda. Opportunists absolutely love it when the purity of these pillars is corrupted, or when the pillar itself is destroyed in some sort of revolutionary behavior, because they know it has to be replaced immediately. They know that civilization and the minds of all the people will feel that vacuum and will just allow the first thing that comes along to fill that vacuum. And they are always very prepared. The communists were very prepared to fill the vacuum of religion with their government. The bankers in the Renaissance era were very prepared to fill the vacuum of religion with their money. The modern politicians were very prepared with the shattering of the philosophical pillar to replace it with their partisan politics and identity politics. The music industry and the postmodern artists were extremely prepared with the shattering of the artistic pillar to fill it with just their crap, their mediocre crap that they can make millions of dollars on and put subliminal propaganda in. And when the scientific pillar shattered, that's when the computer scientists and technocrats swooped in, Now everybody thinks like computer science is like the greatest thing, and like, external technology is the only measure of science. That science isn't worth anything unless you can make a toy out of it. And if you watch my videos on Rudolf Steiner and Ahriman and transhumanism, you'll know that the shattering of the scientific pillar is very important for like the dark forces of this world to make us into more and more materialistic thinkers, to just depend more and more on computer technology, to depend more and more on these sort of technologies that automate our thinking, that we don't have to think anymore, we don't have to have responsibility anymore, we don't have to do anything with our minds or bodies anymore. We'll just let machines do it. We'll let computers do it, we'll let automated machines do it, and we don't have to put forth any effort anymore, and we definitely don't have to use our own minds. We don't have to have free thought anymore. We'll just let the AI think for us, and everything will work out just great. And that's what happens with the shattering of the scientific pillar, is we will now put our lives in the hands of external technologies, and science no longer applies to internal things. We only care how it can make us more toys and how it can make us more computers and more machines. And at the risk of our humanity, at the risk of our personal sovereignty, or of our spiritual sovereignty, our independence of will is being taken over by computers slowly and slowly. We're going to be living in just like a giant synthetic matrix pretty soon, and all organic processes will be synthesized, will be mechanical processes now, or electronic and digital processes. And instead of having, a trinary system of body, mind, soul, or body, soul, spirit, or mind, soul, spirit, the threefold human being, we'll have a binary system of just ones and zeros. And we'll have eliminated the spirit, which of course, I think it was like a 17th century or 16th century Catholic injunction got rid of the trinary threefold man, got rid of spirit, and now we're just now we're just body and soul, according to, organized religious dogma. Computer science is just ones and zeros. That's the consequence of the shattering of the scientific pillar, because science can apply to invisible phenomena. As Nikola Tesla said, when science begins exploring invisible phenomena, it will make more progress in 10 years than it has made in its entire existence. And that's absolutely true. Science can apply to spirituality, science can apply to subtle phenomena, to paranormal phenomena, and so on. And the fact that people think it can't is just proof of the corruption of the scientific pillar, and how dire the straits are, that people actually believe science cannot apply to invisible things, that science should not apply to psychological or spiritual things, and that somehow there are other disciplines that have to deal with that, or you don't deal with it at all because quote-unquote science or scientism proves, quote-unquote, that these things don't even exist, so they're not even worth your time to consider. So all four pillars of civilization have been corrupted and even shattered in our modern civilization. And usually it only takes one of these pillars to be corrupted for a civilization to collapse. If you look back at the history of civilizations that have come and gone, usually one or two of these pillars gets corrupted or shattered, and that will lead to the collapse of their entire civilization. As it stands right now, in the early 21st century, all four of these pillars are well and truly corrupted, even broken and deteriorating. So it's incredibly important to think about this. What you have to do is think as an individual as well, because these four pillars, like I said, exist inside of an individual too. We can't really change civilization on the whole by like going out there and trying to make it change. That's some like tampering crap. That's like what pissed off activists do. That's what like corporate Illuminati people try to do. They try to like change the world externally and like just try and like force their will upon people. And sometimes it works a little bit, but it's never a really good foundation to start like that. You start with yourself. If you can properly fix these four pillars within yourself, help your friends and family and your immediate community fix these four pillars within themselves, well, then you've already done more than anyone could ask of you, right? If everybody did that, if everybody fixed the four pillars within their own individual self, imagine all 7 billion people did that, well, then you've fixed civilization. You've fixed all the four pillars of civilization, and you didn't have to force it upon anyone. You know what I mean? So like worry about yourself first, your immediate community second, and then if you have like an opportunity to maybe change the world a little bit, but in a gentle and polite way, you don't want to be like one of these angry activists who obviously they always become tyrants. Revolutionaries and activists, once they get their way, They murder people that get in their way. They murder counter-revolutionaries. They imprison counter-revolutionaries. They kill anyone who opposes them. They censor and everyone. They change the schools to brainwash you into believing whatever their revolutionary new ideas are. So you don't want to be like that. You don't want to force this crap. You don't want to force fix these 4 pillars. If it is not our destiny to fix these 4 pillars, then it's not our destiny to do it. It's not a good thing to try and force this upon people. You can do it to yourself. Live that way, and that will be an example for others to follow. And that's all you can do. Otherwise, you're being tyrannical and imposing your will on others. And that's that Aleister Crowley bullshit. Aleister Crowley. I mispronounced his stupid name. And you don't want to be like him. Some of you probably want to be like him. You listen to the pop music and shit, and all the lyrics are like "do what thou wilt" since like the 1960s. They're all Crowleyites, and they try to impose their will on everyone because they think they're going to be the ones who build the new age and the new civilization. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but I think the way they're going about it is terrible. Because I believe that ends never justify the means. That means are all that's important. Even if the means fail. Even if you don't achieve your goal. Even if the end blows up in your face. It is only important the means you choose to bring about those ends. Do not worry about succeeding or failing. You must go about your goal in the proper and moral and righteous way. So when you want to fix these 4 pillars, you must have the proper means. You cannot do it in an unethical way. You can't be a scientific corporation trying to force stuff on people, trying to force the world to become better. Then you become like Apple or Google. They think they're doing the right thing for the world, but obviously they're not. You can judge a tree by the fruit it bears. Same thing with churches. Like, they're trying to force everyone to believe what they want, because as long as everyone believes what we believe, then the world will be better. And they're trying to force it down everyone's throats, trying to scare people into their flock, and obviously that's unethical. We see the wars that causes. This goes for all 4 pillars. You cannot force these things down people's throats, even if your intentions are good, because you know what the road to hell is paved with. Means are more important than ends. What matters is that you try. What matters is the effort that you put forth. It doesn't matter whether you succeed or fail. So it is urgent, if we want to prevent the collapse of our civilization, to fix these 4 pillars within ourselves. And if we all get along and do that, then the 4 pillars of civilization on the macro level will fix themselves, because we all did it on an individual micro level. And that's all we can do. That's basically how I've been seeing the world for a long time now, is these 4 pillars that are crucial and absolutely necessary for a healthy mind. When one of these pillars is gone, you get psychosis, neurosis, and so on. And civilization at large goes through the same sort of decadent problems that an individual would go through. And so it's important to recognize these 4 pillars, to understand them, to keep them well maintained, to purify them when they need to root out corruption, to constantly meditate on them in your own self and think, is my science proper? Is my spirituality proper? My art, my philosophy, is this all working out properly? Is this all like for the best? And means are more important than ends. Ends never justify means when you're maintaining these pillars. You always have to do this in the most moral and harmonious and beautiful way possible. And don't worry about whether or not your civilization collapses. If it seems to be the destiny of all civilizations to collapse, so don't lose any sleep over it if it happens. It is what it is. What you can do is put forth the effort in your own self and in your immediate community to mend and maintain and purify and allow to grow and flourish these 4 pillars. So thanks for watching this lecture. I know it wasn't too esoteric, but I still think that it's important to have this as a foundation moving forward as we go on with more of these videos. To just always have this in the back of your minds. It'll help inform you as to my views on actual esoteric philosophy going forward. So thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you next time.